So in the last video, I sort of threw this great big subject out there. Is Christianity still worth it? Which, if you watch that video, you'll know that it was kind of a large, overarching talk with a lot of big ideas behind it. But I want to try and get a little smaller in the next few talks, more specific. Turn this into a series and sort of go down the line of core principles and topics in Christianity, and see if there's a way to reclaim these ideas, or see if they still have value and are worth taking with us as we do life and journey forward. So I have an easy one for today. I figured let's start out with a simple black and white topic that no one has strong opinions on. Evangelism. Boom. Easy. And I remember years ago, I was in my early 20s, and I was walking down the streets of Minneapolis after a concert, had let out. It was late at night, and I had gone to the concert with my friends, and we kind of separated to go to our cars to drive to a bar where we were going to hang out afterwards. And I passed by a group of people who very suddenly and very forcibly shoved a pamphlet in my hand. And the pamphlet said something along the lines of, "Do you know where you will be spending eternity?" Now, if you know me, you know that 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to be very confrontational. But if you know me, then you know that 1 out of 10 times, I am going to be a little confrontational, and I'm probably going to be a bit of a dick about it. So I stopped, and I looked at them, and I had this kind of fiery feeling in me, and I had just come out of a really high-octane concert, and I had a few overpriced cocktails, and most importantly, I thought I had a pretty good idea where I was going to end up for eternity, and so I engaged with them, and I asked, "Well, do you come to shows in Minneapolis often?" And one of them said, "Oh, is this what this is? We just travel around, and we just got into the city late, and we're on our way to where we're spending the night, and we saw the crowd leaving the venue, and we decided to pull over and start evangelizing." And so I told them about the concert, and I told them about the neighborhood, and how I was a Christian, and how I was a pastor at a local church. And one of the guys there, because obviously they were all guys, they always are, but one of the guys there said, "Well, these people are all closed off to the truth. They don't want to hear the gospel." And I couldn't quite find a way that was nice to say, "Probably because you're really annoying." So instead I said, "I just don't think this kind of thing is fruitful here. If anything, I think it might be making things harder. There are a lot of small community-focused churches here, just trying to do really good work in their communities around them. And, you might be making it harder for these churches to be seen as humble and gracious and loving to all of God's creation." And one of these guys snapped back at me almost instantly, and he said, but this is what we've been commanded to do as Christians. And he said it in such a way that it honestly made me realize, I'm talking to 3 large, strange men on a street corner in the middle of the night in Minneapolis. Maybe I shouldn't be trying to pick a fight with them. But I also had the thought of, really? Is this what we've been commanded to do? To accost strangers on the street with these high anxiety questions about their soul's eternal fate? To steer every conversation with friends or neighbors into a direction of them admitting their sins so they can finally accept Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior? Is it Is it wrong if I don't live every moment of my life ready to pull the car over when I spot a crowd of presumably lost souls so that I can convince them of their wickedness and the damnability of their souls? Is this what Jesus wants from us? Now, in many settings, in the minds of a lot of people all over the world, and shared by atheists and Christians alike, what these men were doing is what many would call evangelism. It comes from the Greek word Evangelion, which means literally sharing the good news, or to put it in a different way, sharing the gospel. Which I'm only saying to show that sometimes I do actually know what I'm talking about, and I do own a Greek dictionary. So, thanks, Dad. But in the early church, this word evangelism became shorthand for talking about Jesus, the Christ, who was put to death by the powers that be in the world, but was raised by the power of God's love, and through whom all creation is now being restored. And yet, for many of us, maybe those of us feeling a little burnt out or frustrated with the church in the West, or maybe even more specifically by the church in the United States, evangelism rarely sounds like good news. What is it about street preachers or overzealous evangelists that bothers us so greatly, so deeply? And maybe this is unfair, maybe it's not unfair, but I think most of us just kind of assume that the loudest, proudest street evangelizers are simply working out their own ego issues. They seem a little too happy to be alone in the crowd, the lone hero standing tall in the midst of the heathen concert goers, the few who stand for light in a world full of darkness, a modern-day martyr who, the more we ridicule them and tell them how wrong they are, the more it means they're just doing the right thing. But I can't help but think to myself, like, what are they getting out of this? Maybe some of you have thought about this too when you see them. There's just something insecure about them. Other times it doesn't just come off as insecure, but it comes off as coercive. Because it's good news, eternity in the kingdom of heaven, living in paradise. Unless you don't accept it, then it becomes really, really bad news. Because let me see if I have this straight. Let me know if I get this right. You believe in a God of infinite love, and if I don't believe in him, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, that merciful God who is full of love is going to damn me to hell, and I will burn for all of eternity. Yeah, there's nothing coercive in that news. And no, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have all the answers, because you can't escape the idea of hell when you begin to delve into Christianity. So yes, at some point you're going to have to read the scriptures, and you're going to have to read theology and talk to spiritual leaders. And if you're really committed like I am, or if you're simply kind of a nerd with too much time on their hands like I am, you're going to have to read linguists and scholars and translators to pull out a lot of fine details of late BCE Jewish theology and scripture, and how that would have informed Jesus's teachings. And so what does it mean when he talked about hell, and what hell really is, and who would be going to that hell, and in what capacity? And the point is, I'm not going to try and convince you that there is a hell if you don't believe in it. And I'm not going to try and convince you that hell doesn't exist if you do believe in it. But the point I'm making is, what choice, what freedom, what message of love are you giving to people if your first question to them upon meeting them is a loaded one that sets you up to be able to tell them, if you don't believe exactly what I tell you to, you are going to be tortured forever. Because one, you're not setting up a conversation. You're not kind of setting up a space for growth. What you are doing is setting up to beat someone over the head. And two, if they do believe you, God forbid, they're entering into a system where instead of having a relationship with you and with others and with a community, you now have some sort of power over them. You told them that they have to listen to you or be tortured forever, and now they have to listen to you forever. And you wonder why people sometimes call religion a cult. It begs the questions, did cults take a page out of Christianity's playbook? Or did Christianity take a page out of cult's playbook? Because don't get me wrong, this kind of dealing, this kind of theology, this kind of faith is cultish. The point remains that if your God is that violent, punitive God, who I would argue has more in common with the religious and political leaders who put Jesus to death on a cross, rather than the Christ who was crucified to overcome violence, but if that God is your God, then no wonder you end up looking like him. Tragically, this theological assumption has led to some of the greatest atrocities in the history of Christianity. And when partnered with the power of empire, it has led to colonization. So even if someone's evangelism isn't threatening or insincere, I still think that it can be interpreted as inappropriate. I mean, how many times do people find out that you're a Christian and you can almost hear them saying, "Oh, you're religious, you're a Christian. Okay, well, that's fine. Just don't push your stuff on me." Or if you're meeting a Christian, then you're the one thinking it. How often does that happen? Because it feels like Christians are always pushing their stuff on us. I suspect for most of us watching this, or those of you who have agreed with what I've said so far in these videos more or less, there are few social sins worse than trying to make someone believe what you believe. It's arrogant, it's elitist, and it's not something that good, progressive-minded people do in the year 2023. Except we do it all the time and with everything. From TV to social media to politics to inspired quotes to today's top stories, we are evangelizing non-stop. Let's not play cute. We are trying to convert people every day when it comes to racism, sexism, addiction services, homophobia, affordable housing. We will post links and memes and posts and links to letters that we can send to our representatives, all in the hopes of getting one senator to just change their mind so that the angels will rejoice. And I'm not teasing anyone about this. I'm being deadly serious. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't be doing this. I do this. The people I love do this. And maybe some of the more skeptical among you will disagree with me, but I truly think that we all do this because we are sharing the goodness and the dream for a better future that was given to us by God, by a force, by a spirit, by something that is behind all things. And we are giving witness to that, how to make the wrong things right. So yes, in a very real way, many of us share good news every day. It's more so that we don't know how to talk about the good news of Jesus. I know that's my struggle. It might seem that I really love to talk about Jesus, since all I want to do is talk about Jesus all day, but I'm making videos for the internet, talking to a camera while I'm alone in my office. Talking to someone face to face who I don't know, very different. Even sharing something kind of vaguely spiritual on social media has moments where I'm like, ooh, is this a little too overtly Jesus-y? Which again is followed by pangs of guilt for having that thought and then feeling like Peter denying Jesus for fear of being crucified alongside Jesus. So I get it. Words like church, religion, even God have been so misused and abused that they can immediately spark pain or anxiety or anger, or can be triggering and can make situations rife for miscommunication and projection. It's why whenever I make one of these videos, I try to be so intentional about saying, hey, if God is too big a word for you, if it's too charged, just swap it, just change it. You don't need to call the utmost being something super specific. Maybe God is big enough to understand what you mean if you say the universe, the spark, the creator, the father, the parent, the thing behind all things, the great wind, the spirit, the engine that moves everything forward, or something else that I haven't even heard of yet. The point is, look how often and how far I go to try and make sure that when I want to talk about subjects having to do with things that are bigger and grander than just my tiny, insignificant self, I'm doing my best to stop any preconceived notions from being formed before I can even get to the actual subject of what I'm trying to say. I get that when we begin to talk about God far too often, we are opening up a can of worms so deep that people will already have thoughts before we even get to the thing we're trying to say. That makes the whole concept of evangelizing very hard and awkward and uncomfortable, and I understand why people don't want to do it. I do. And yet I cannot shake a clear conviction that if we're going to try and think about all the core elements of what it means to follow Jesus, what it might mean to be a Christian in my city, my community, and in myself, then we all need a better way to talk about God. We need a way to talk about the thing that sparks all of life, the creator who is endlessly creating, the engine that is driving this whole thing forward, this thing that is behind and within and above and below and in front of all things. A way that is rooted in humble sharing and being a non-anxious presence and in a mutual transformation for people on all sides. And it just so happens, as when we turn to the scriptures, we actually find a lot of examples of what evangelism can look like. And they are very different from the assumptions of most street preachers. The book of Acts tells the story of Peter, one of the earliest followers of Jesus and a leader in the early church, who is summoned to the house of a Roman centurion named Cornelius. Now, Peter is Jewish, and Cornelius was a foreigner, what they would have called a Gentile. And so Peter, as a good Jewish man, knows that to even enter the household of a Gentile would be to break all sorts of rules about diet and ritual cleanliness. But not only that, but the centurion would have been an embodiment of everything that Peter was raised to hate or to fear or to distrust. Foreign occupation. Rome had invaded Israel, God's promised land, and had sullied it by not following God's commandments. Systemic injustice, coercive power. It was the boot of Rome, the boot of the empire that had stood on the neck of Israel since before Peter was even born. It was the power of Rome that had put Peter's friend and rabbi to death on a cross in the first place. However, Peter has been praying, which is always a good start. And in praying, Peter received a vision from God in which he's been called to never call anything or anyone unclean. What he doesn't know is that at the same time, Cornelius has been praying, and Cornelius has received a message from God to invite a strange man named Peter into his home. And it's here at this intersection, in this encounter that is uncomfortable for everyone, that God will do God's own evangelism. So Acts chapter 10, and Cornelius was waiting for them, having called together his relations and intimate friends. On Peter's arrival, Cornelius met him, and falling at his feet, worshipped him. But Peter made him get up, saying, "Stand up! I am only a mortal." And as he talked with him, he went in and found that many had assembled. And he said to them, "You yourselves know that it is improper for a Jew to associate with or to visit an outsider. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. Now may I ask why you sent for me?" And so the story goes on. Cornelius explains his vision to Peter, and Peter responds, "I now understand how true it is that God shows no favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who reveres him and does what is right." And then Peter tells his story. Peter tells of what he has seen, who Jesus was, the life that Jesus lived, his death, his resurrection, and how the role that Peter and the other followers of Jesus now have are to be witnesses to God's work. So the story concludes that while Peter was still speaking, the Spirit fell upon all who heard the word. The circumcised believers who had come with Peter were astounded that the gift of the Spirit had been poured out even on the Gentiles, for they heard them speaking in tongues and extolling God. Then Peter said, "Can anyone withhold the water for baptizing these people who have received the Holy Spirit, just as we have?" So he ordered them to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. Then they invited him to stay for several days. This is the word of the Lord. So this story, along with the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, set a really early foundation for evangelism that looks really different from how modern day evangelists do it. You might have noticed that the word evangelism doesn't even show up in the text, but a different word does. Witness. We don't see evangelism, but we see the word witness. And this is good news, at least I think it is, because a witness is not out there to win an argument. A witness doesn't need to change someone else's mind to know what they know. A witness simply speaks to what they have experienced. That's it. When we shift our thinking from evangelizing to witnessing, I think it helps in a lot of ways. And I just so happen to have 3 examples that I think shows how it helps. The first, being a witness shifts us from a controlling conversation to being a non-anxious presence. Only a weak faith feels anxiety when other people don't agree. Faith is the idea of being deeply rooted enough in what you know is true that you can stand alone in it without, and this is a key caveat, you can stand alone in it without feeling superior or smug. And there's that difference between a witness and those megaphone preachers on the street who seem to get more and more set in their ways the more you disagree with them. Because it's not enough that they have their truth, but they revel in the idea that their truth is better than yours. And in their own way, it means that they are better than you. On the flip side, a witness, we share what we've experienced, but we share it with an open hand, unafraid of pushback or questions that come, because we know that we are only witnessing to what we know. And it is only the Spirit that moves behind all things that can actually change hearts and minds. 2, being a witness shifts us from a focus on others others' conversion to be like us, to a mutual transformation in the Spirit. I think one of the greatest mistakes Christianity ever made was conflating the gospel of Jesus Christ with one particular culture. This meant that when Christianity was exported around the world via missionaries and church orders, they brought the message of Christ, but it was dressed fully in European culture. And it was often assumed that to receive one, you had to receive the other. But if we look at the verses we just read, it is Peter and Cornelius together in their differences that reveal God's heart. Both of them are risking something in conversation. Both of them share what God has already been up to in their lives. And in the end, both of them are transformed by their experience. Cornelius comes to know that God is specifically the one revealed in Jesus. And Peter comes to know that Jesus' new movement is going to transcend his own tribe, his city, his country, his culture. And he must no longer consider any other culture or people or nation unclean. And there are places on earth where this mutual transformation has happened. You can say a lot about St. Patrick, and there is a lot of sketchy history that is just mythic legend about the life of St. Patrick. And I also won't pretend to say that he never coerced anyone in his life. I'm not trying to paint him as something he wasn't. But the missionary work of St. Patrick did grow into Celtic Christianity, which is one of the oldest and most vibrant expressions of faith anywhere in the world. And it is uniquely a faith specific to that culture, to that country. You can't find it anywhere else. But I daily lament that the first Christians who came to Turtle Island, to North America, failed to engage in God's work of mutual transformation, instead insisting on the indigenous people here to be like us. And in trying to do that, what blessings did we miss? How might we have been mutually transformed by the power of the Spirit? 3, being a witness shifts us from a focus on answers to a focus on experience. I know that so many people are scared to talk about God because someone might ask you a question you don't know the answer to. And then you'll freak out, and then you'll look stupid, and you'll feel stupid, and they'll think you're stupid, and then you're just done. But I want to suggest that in a culture and a time full of nothing but fast answers, where Google takes all the mystery and preciousness and conversation out of learning something new, maybe the last thing we need right now is more fast answers and arguments. We've got a million books on the case for something, the case for Christ, the case for miracles, the case for whatever else you can think of. We have so much argument and debate and everything about proving ourselves right and showing fact to faith. Maybe now is a time to try a different way to talk about faith. Because to encounter God is to experience an event. It's like the birth of a child or the death of a loved one. The most sacred things in life cannot be turned into mere information. They must be experienced. When I talk to anyone about God, I have this kind of mantra that I keep in my brain, this core anchoring sentence that I repeat to myself over and over as I talk to them. I say, I don't want to make you believe what I believe. I want you to experience what I've experienced. Because if you experience what I've experienced, and if I can experience what you've experienced, then the Spirit is going to do something here. When we experience the presence of God, it nourishes our hearts, filling us up with something living, like a spring of water flowing through us and out of us, and it naturally spills all over and changes everything that we do or say. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about that cheesy mountaintop moment, the last day of church camp kind of experience. You don't need the goosebumps. I'm talking about the simple stuff. Try going for a walk without your phone and ask God to meet you. Sit for a bit in silence by yourself and greet your deepest fears and anxiety, and then ask the Lord of life and death to meet you there. Pay attention to that little voice in your head that is always insisting on constant improvement and shames you for not being better or not doing more, and is swayed by this and that and all those advertisements that we are bombarded with every single day, promising to fix us in all of our faults. And ask the Spirit to wash over you with the good news of unearned grace, and know that you are loved just the way you are, and that you are enough. As we learn to make space to encounter the spark of life, we'll know how and when to witness. Better yet, miracle of miracles, we might even find that we want to. So the street preachers and I, we talked for a while more before they eventually, moved on to get to the place where they were staying. And I went to the bar to meet up with my friends and have a drink, like the good Christian I am. And as we sat there, I sort of thought to myself, sure, they were annoying, and at the worst, street preachers had been abusive and toxic and pushed people further away from God. And I'm just sitting here. Is that better? Can I throw stones when they were on the corner, engaging in the awkward work of going up to strangers and talking to them about a fairly uncomfy subject? They're taking a risk. I'm just sitting here having a drink with my pals. And from time to time after I had that encounter with the street preachers, I've asked myself, am I willing to take a risk and be a witness about God's presence in my life? Or am I just making excuses to be a little more comfortable? About a year or so after my encounter with the street preachers, I was working at a coffee shop, and I had this tight-knit group of regulars, and we would talk frequently and really quite deeply. And I know that I've talked about this time in my life fairly often, so I don't want to rehash it too much, but it was late into a closing shift, and one of my favorite regulars came in with a group of friends. And they all sat at the bar together, and we sort of began to make small talk, and this regular knew that I was a pastor. In the past we had long, deep, big, engaging conversations, and he was an atheist and a student at the liberal arts college across the street. He had come over from China for school, and since school had started, he probably would come in 3 or 4 times a week, and we would just talk for hours during my shift. And during our talks, a lot of the times he would ask me questions about my faith that I didn't know the answer to. It was kind of that moment of realizing I didn't know why I believed what I believed. And his questions prodded me to dive deeper into research and ponder and work at figuring out what I really did actually believe and why. And so then after a few days, I would come back to him with my answer. And then I would ask him questions about how he didn't believe in a God or an afterlife. And sometimes he wouldn't have a good answer. And so then he would leave and he would think about it, and he would study and ponder, and then he would come back after a few days and he would have his answer and he would tell it to me. And neither of us were trying to convert the other one. We were just friends talking, slowly transforming because of the relationship we had with each other. And so this regular and these friends that he had brought, and myself, we began to talk at this coffee shop while I worked behind the bar, and I quickly gathered that they were, they had had a few drinks and they kind of had that air about them. And all of a sudden, my friend, this regular, he looked at me and he had this kind of like stupid grin on his face, and he asked me very nonchalantly, very giddily almost. He kind of, it was like a good-natured joke, but he asked, "So you're like super religious, right?" Which was kind of odd because we'd been talking for months at this point. But again, he was a little drunk, but it kind of felt like a question that was meant to kind of like catch his friends up into the conversations we'd been having. Because the moment he asked it, like their ears kind of like peaked up, and like they all kind of like tuned in and began to kind of watch us like, oh, this is different. And immediately I had the kind of like twist in my stomach that made me want to say something, anything that would kind of separate me from the street preachers of the world. And so I wanted to say something like, oh, well, I'm a Jesus follower. It's just sort of more like a relationship than a religion, though, But instead, I did my best to enter into a non-anxious presence, which is very hard for me. And I just kind of smiled, and in a similar sort of semi-joking way, I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm super religious." And so my friend, the regular, he then asked me, "How does God feel about me?" And kind of the whole mood changed. And suddenly the whole group just kind of like looked at me and were locked on. Like all eyes were on me, and my heart was pounding, and I was just so uncomfortable. And I really tried to relive every experience I had ever had in God's presence. And so I looked at this friend, this regular of mine, at 9:45 on a Friday night as he was drunk and smelled of cigarette smoke, grabbing a cortado from an empty coffee shop in the middle of uptown Minneapolis. And the words just kind of flowed out of me without any effort. And I responded fully, sincerely. I responded, "Oh, God is madly in love with you." And the group sitting there just laughed. And I mean really laughed. Like they laughed hard. And I just kind of shrugged and, I tried to play it cool, but I was embarrassed by how earnest my response was, until I noticed that one person wasn't laughing. And it was the one who had asked the question in the first place. And it looked like he was holding back tears. All of this is to say that I don't really know how evangelism works. I don't know what it has looked like in other times and places, and I certainly don't know what to make of the colonialist history tied to it. Nor do I know how it fits in a modern world with its myriad of religious beliefs. What I do know is that every person in the world is hungry for love, and that the God that is revealed through Jesus Christ is madly in love with each and every one of us. And that to me is good news worth sharing. So that's what I got for you today. If this message is beneficial to you, I hate to kind of do the whole YouTube-y shtick, but like, subscribe. But really what's more important is, hey, leave a comment. The point of this work is something I've said a lot, is not to be the final word. I don't want to tell people what to think, but it's to be the first word. I want to start conversations. I want to spark dialogue. So if this meant something, if there's things rattling in your brain, leave a comment down below or message me at Brennan Johnson on Instagram. I want to engage in conversations. It's kind of the thing I do, I guess. But I hope this was beneficial. And so with that, I'll just say grace and peace. Cheers.